against predatory lenders, including some cases involving the Military Lending Act. They've essentially tried to lay off the staff. Indeed, President Trump said in the oath of office that the CFPB was set up to destroy people, quote, and that his goal for the CFP is to, quote, be totally eliminated. He also said that the CFP staff is a, quote, vicious group of people. So you do not appear to have much presidential support or OMB support, and I have this sinking feeling that you're departing Liverpool on the Titanic. So good luck.
Thank you. And you left 20 seconds on the table. Thank you, sir.
I'm going to yield it back because I'm sure my colleagues can use it.
Thank you. Senator Tillis.
Hello, Mr. McKernan, and I'm going to come to you, but to all the nominees, congratulations. You should take it as the honor that it is. I hope to get to some of you all, but Mr. McKernan, you're the sort of person that other people on the panel should appreciate because I suspect you're going to get most of the questions. I think some people have suggested that you lack experience. So I typically don't try to reduce things to yes or no answers, but I'd like to get some yes or no's with maybe a quick sentence on a couple of things because people say you just lack experience for the job. I disagree. Do you hold an undergraduate degree in economics as well as a JD?
Yes, Senator.
And that, I think, came from Duke?
The JD. Tennessee,
yeah.
Proud volunteer for the.
Do you have experience practicing law related to banking, financial services industry?
Yes, Senator. 9 years.
Give me an idea, I think, between 2007 2017?
That's right. Well, 2007 to 2017, that's right, yes.
Yep. Do you have experience working on fair lending, consumer protection law involving areas such as Truth in Lending Act, the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, and the laws governing unfair, deceptive, and abusive acts or practices?
Yes, Senator, did quite a bit of that work in private practice. Then obviously in my 6 or 7 years focused on the mortgage markets. And then I oversee the enforcement committee at the FDIC, which includes a number of those laws.
Mm-hmm. Do you have experience interpreting consumer financial protection laws?
Yes, Senator.
Any examples?
Well, like I said, almost 10 years in private practice and then in the work at the FDIC, both dealing with supervisory matters that come before the board, but also the enforcement work and the enforcement committee.
Do you have any experience related to mortgage markets, a key area of the CFPB's regulatory and supervisory jurisdiction?
Yes, Senator. I work with Senator Corker, Senator Toomey, covering mostly housing finance mortgage issues. And then 2 years at FHFA, focused on mortgage finance issues. And then, of course, at the FDIC, we have quite a bit of mortgage activity.
And do you have experience working with CFPB staff?
Yes, I was detailed there for a short time while I was at FHFA.
Do you have experience with senior leadership at the federal financial regulator?
Yes, Senator. As a member of the board of directors, got to know a number of my counterparts and, of course, the folks at the FDIC.
Do you have experience working and collaboratively with others in senior leadership positions at federal financial regulator, regardless of their political affiliation, to address complex banking and financial services issue? And give me an example if you can.
Yeah, Acting Comptroller Sue and I partnered together to oversee the investigation into our workplace culture matters. I think that was an investigation that really earned a lot of respect on a bipartisan basis. And then I worked with Director Chopra to address gaps in the FDIC's monitoring of asset managers' large investments in our banking institutions.
And maybe added to that, I know that I believe that the record indicates that you've also worked on workplace and cultural issues at the institution. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, after the Cleary Gottlieb report, I pushed quite hard for the FDIC board to take more of an active role in overseeing our cultural transformation efforts. A particular focus was trying to get us investigating some of the allegations of misconduct involving senior executives that had been identified by Cleary Gottlieb. That unfortunately it was about 5 months of debate, but we did eventually get those investigations started.
You think the CFPB is a prudential regulator?
No.
Good answer. And Mr. Pulte, I may come back to you, Mr. McKernan. Mr. Pulte, I had one question for you because of your deep experience in construction. I hear a lot of people talk about we need more inventory for affordable housing. And almost invariably, it's in the discussion about how we need more regulations for housing. How do those two work in your professional experience? Not necessarily in the lanes for the role that you're moving into, but how do those two, are those at cross purposes with one another? How can we produce more affordable housing in the context of more regulations? Is that something I just don't understand?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. They're almost inversely related, as you pointed out. But obviously, the regulations in some ways exist for a reason. I would say, depending on the municipality, if you look at like the state of Texas, for example, a lot less regulation than, for example, California in some cases. I think one of the beauties of President Trump is that he is laser focused on slashing useless regulations, and I expect him to continue to be doing that. And if confirmed as FHFA director, I'll be looking to do everything that we can while also following the law and the statute.
Thank you, Mr. McKernan. Is rulemaking by enforcement an effective way to conduct regulation?
No, Senator.
Can you give me an example, one example of why that's a bad thing?
Yeah, well, it offends our basic notions of fairness. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. You can look to the courts on this. One of the most perhaps egregious examples of the CFPB was where a mortgage servicer, they retroactively applied a new rulemaking that was 180 degrees opposite the prior agency's rule. They applied that rule retroactively beyond the statute of limitations. And when the D.C. Circuit panel looked at this case, when they looked at this, when it was on appeal, and this is a panel, not just one judge, the panel said this, quote, violated bedrock principles of due process, this retroactive application beyond that. This is what's got to come to an end at the CFPB.
Thank you. I look forward to supporting all of your confirmations.
On behalf of the chairman, Senator Warner.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. And I think Mr. Pulte just kind of maybe put the core of everything we're talking about. You know, I'm for getting rid of useless regulations as well. But the question is, what are useless regulations? And I think they're legitimate areas we can disagree on. And I hate to kind of follow on my friend Senator Tillis, but Mr. McKernan, I enjoyed our conversation. And let me say for the record, you know, I've enjoyed working with you, particularly during your time with Senator Corker. I thought you were fair. I thought you had a reasonable approach. I don't question your qualifications. Also worked with you with Senator Toomey. I do want to echo something you said, and I hope you'll reconfirm in our conversation, that you didn't have a complete, you know, the way some of my colleagues think that everything the prior leadership did at the CFPB did somehow was bad, but you did think that some of the predecessor policies like the data broker rules and privacy issues, CFPB had acted accordingly.
Well, Senator, one thing I do commend Director Chopra on was his work to increase our attention on some of the very significant policy issues posed by data collection, whether it's data aggregators, data brokers, and you know there's privacy issues here. There's potentially national security issues here, and I think it's important that we, both in the regulated space and in the rest of our elected officials, continue to focus on this as these entities are collecting more and more data, and the analytics get more and more powerful. There's some real policy issues here, and I think Director Chopra was on to something by focusing.
Well, and I hope, again, that comment that not everything bad in the last administration, not everything the last administration touched, even at CFPB, was bad, will not cost you votes on the majority side. But I do have to tell you, and Senator Reid was getting at this, I got folks that are terrified. I had a lady call the other day, didn't know whether she'd get money out of her bank anymore because of fear of consumer protections. I had somebody who had her mom scammed for $80,000. I am hugely afraid of OMB Director Vogt's attempt to, frankly, terrorize, traumatize the federal workforce. And you know, Senator Reid gave the question. I'll give you a chance to answer it. You know, you're an independent agency. I remember very well how you were created. And it was a negotiation with then Senator Shelby, and it was frankly our Republican friends who said, let's not have it a new agency, let's put it under the funding cycle of the Fed. But are you going to be able to stand up to Director Vogt? You got to enforce the law.
Senator, I'm going to enforce the law. That's my commitment to you. That means performing each of the statutorily assigned responsibilities for the CFPB. And I will just say that, you know, I think my record speaks to my willingness to assert my point of view, and I'm not going to be, you know,
Well, again,
no
but
shrink
this
of
is
violence.
going to be, this is the nub. I share Senator Warren's view that, nobody elected Elon Musk and his Doge bros. But you're going to have to stand up to this, and would you acknowledge again, and Senator Warren may have missed this, where the nominee actually acknowledged that under Director Chopra, good things occasionally happened. But we also at least acknowledge that the $20 billion returned to 195 million consumers was actually a good record for the CFPB.
Well, Senator, I think it's important that we have redress to consumers. I think it's important that bad actors, repeat offenders, do have.
How about I go to the Tom Tillis mode? That's a yes or no question? $20 billion back to consumers across America, good or bad?
Senator, I don't think we should evaluate the success of the CFPB based on dollar numbers or enforcement count. That's like evaluating an official based on the number of fouls he calls during the game. We should evaluate the game on whether it's fair. We should evaluate the CFPB director based on whether we have fair.
You're going the wrong direction.
competitive markets.
It bothers me if you can't say $20 billion back to American consumers based upon illicit activity. And listen, I'm, notoriously viewed as way too pro-banker on my side of the aisle. But you should. Let me just give you a little bit. Let me just give you a little coaching here. When my Republican colleagues tried desperately to get the ODNI director to acknowledge that Edward Snowden was a traitor, and the nominee couldn't bring herself to say those words. Think about that, and then getting $20 billion back in rebates to American consumers, good or bad?
Senator, it is very important that we have customer redress as part of the remedies. That's one important just in its own right. You've got to make customers whole when they're harmed. You also have to keep the playing field level across market participants. And if bad actors are able to keep ill-gotten gains, then that gives them a competitive advantage.
Just say yes.
Restitution is good. But I am not going to get in the practice of evaluating the success of the Bureau based on dollar numbers.
But the way we measure, I agree. The number of fouls called is not. But if there is a process, do you think part of that $20 billion was inappropriately returned? Were the institutions cheated out of that money?
On restitution, I'm not aware of any that was.
Okay, so then the answer would be yes. I just would like one last. I didn't get to you, Mr. Pulte, on we talked about GSE reform, and Mr. McKernan it is a gnarly issue. Do not do this quickly for a tax paid for the reconciliation bill. If we're going to do an explicit guarantee, it's got to be paid for. Last point, I appreciate Senator Rounds, and there was a minute and a half given back.
I noticed.
And I'm not going to go the whole minute and a half.
You're pushing it a little bit,
but I would just
getting
refer
some ability here. So,
Mr. McKernan, as you look at the CFPB and you look at adequate staffing and right sizing, I would go back again to the Inspector General. Inspector General, what's this, 30 seconds. Inspector General concluded after the Signature Bank collapse that one of the reasons the FDIC screwed up in delays in supervisory activities was because there were shortfalls in terms of personnel at the agency. I hope you would take that lesson from the OIG at FDIC in your current job before you go willy-nilly and look at the workforce at the CFPB and bring the chainsaw approach. Thank you.
and with that, Senator Kennedy.
Mr. Pulte,
Yes, sir.
the Biden administration allowed borrowers to take out bigger mortgages than they can afford, didn't it?
Senator, I do think that we need to make sure.
Did it allow them to take out bigger mortgages than they can afford or not?
I think sometimes people definitely do take out mortgages that they can't afford.
Okay. In fact, 64% of the FHA borrowers last year exceeded the 43% debt-to-income ratio, didn't it?
I would believe that to be true. I'm not familiar with that
In
statistic.
fact, the FHA loan portfolio today is bigger than it was before the 2008 housing crisis, isn't it?
I would believe that to be true, but FHFA would be under HUD, so I.
And when people borrow more money than they can afford, many times they default. Is that true?
That is true.
And I'm not just picking on FHA. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have done this too, haven't they?
Yes, sir.
Now, normally when people borrow too much money, they default. But under the Biden administration, they implemented a program where if you're about to default, the taxpayers will pay your mortgage. Isn't that correct?
Do you have a specific policy that you're referencing, Senator?
Yeah. The FHA instituted a program that pays mortgage servicers to make borrowers missed payments for them.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I'm not familiar with that specific FHA
Well, you
program.
need to be.
I would be happy to look into
You
it and
need to
get back
be.
with you.
They take taxpayer money and they give it to people, and it's added to the principal of their home without accruing interest, so that a lot of these folks now have homes on which they owe more money than the home is worth.
Yes.
You're not familiar with that?
Well, I'm familiar with that general concept, yes, sir. And if I was...
Isn't it a fact that the FHA made 556,841 incentive payments last year?
Sir, I'm not familiar with that exact statistic. FHFA would be under my friend and colleague Scott Turner.
Right, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac did the same thing, didn't they?
They probably did.
So we got a house of cards here. It's worse than it was before the 2008 housing crisis. You've got the federal government adopting a policy, don't worry about how much you make. We'll loan you all you need to buy a home. And then when folks get in trouble, the federal government says, don't worry about it. We'll make your payments for you. So you won't default, or you won't have to sell your home. That's one of the reasons housing prices are so high, isn't it?
In many ways, yes, sir. And I think that safety and soundness is absolutely critical.
Are you going to fix that?
I'm going to work day and night, sir. Yes, sir, to work very
I'm
strongly.
going to adopt the Tillis rule. Is that a yes or a no?
I will absolutely work on that issue, I promise.
I mean, this is absurd. Now, I want everybody who can afford it to own a home.
Yes, sir.
But if you start giving away money and giving away homes, we're going to have another housing crisis.
We can't let that
And
happen.
the numbers are worse today as a result of the Biden administration than they were in 2008. Are they not?
I'm not sure which numbers you're specifically referring to, but inflation is
I'm
way out.
referring to the accurate numbers.
I believe that the last 4 years have been extremely challenging.
Well, I appreciate all that, but don't start talking like a bureaucrat. You're not confirmed yet. We got a problem here. You got to address it.
Yes, sir. And I will be laser focused on this issue. And
Dr. I can't see that for Dr. Miran. One of the best ways to get down prices is to deregulate, isn't it?
Thank you, Senator. I do agree that regulations prevent production, and if we can remove regulations, we can get more production.
Well, I'm hoping that you and Russ Vogt will focus, among other things, on deregulation. Now, I know everybody's talking about DOGE and immigration and the war in Ukraine and the Super Bowl, but meanwhile, people are still suffering from high prices. Very predictable. Because when you have inflation and you get it down, that's disinflation. But the housing prices, or the high prices, still remain. It's not President Trump's fault. That's just the way it works. Now we can make those prices go down, but we have to go into a recession, wouldn't we? That's one way, isn't it?
Senator,
I got 30 seconds. That's one way, isn't it?
yes, it's not.
Well, but you let Warner go on like a he was wild as a March hare.
I'm still letting you go on for a little bit, but
Okay.
now you're 47.
My point is one of the ways to get prices down is to start deregulating.
That's a much better way.
And I'm hoping the White House is going to get you and Russ Vogt to focus on it.
I agree. Removing barriers to the abilities of firms to produce will get them to produce more stuff, lower prices.
My work here is done.
And
Thank
with
you.
that, Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, I think. First of all, to the panelists, thank you for your willingness to do this at this point in time. It is important that we have people there that understand the background experience of the agency that's needed, but you also have the experience. And welcome to all your family members that have to sit through this. Let me start with you, Mr. Pulte. Can I kind of want to put it back. We got off the rails there for a minute, and I saw you struggling there, and rightfully so. Let's talk about the agency that you are actually nominated for, which is the Federal Housing Finance Agency, not FHA, which you have no control over, but I appreciate you trying to answer those questions. But I do know this, and thank you for meeting with me, because we had a great conversation. And we talked about the fact that under the Federal Housing Finance Agency, there was a comprehensive review of the federal home loan banks. And this is something that I have been following and is important for me and in my state, because we have a housing crisis, particularly affordable housing or workforce housing crisis. And I'm curious now if you've had the chance to review it, and which recommendation from the comprehensive review do you plan to support and implement?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I very much enjoyed meeting with you as well. As you know, the state of Nevada has been very important to our family over the years. The family's legacy company's probably built over 10,000 homes in Nevada. So very much appreciated meeting with you, and think very highly of your staff as well. They care about this issue very deeply. With regard to some of the things that we talked about, I was able to look at some of the material that you prepared. I believe very strongly that we need to follow the law and the statute, particularly as it relates to the federal home loan banks. This is something I also talked about with Senator Warren when I was in her office, was, will the statute and the law be followed? And I think it's very important as it relates to the federal home loan banks. A lot of times people forget about the federal home loan banks because they're so focused on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And I would absolutely work with you on that, and I look forward to doing that.
So let me ask you this. Do you support requiring the federal home loan banks provide more than 20% of their net income for affordable housing and community development?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I know this is something that you and your staff feel very passionately about, and I would absolutely continue to work with you on it. As it pertains to this issue, I will follow the law and follow the statute, and be open-minded with anything, including ideas that you have on this matter. But in terms of that question, I'd like the benefit of getting inside of the organization first, if confirmed, and then be able to give you a better answer to that question.
Thank you. Mr. McKernan. Again, appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. Let me ask you a couple questions about the CFPB. Unfortunately, in Nevada, we rank second in financial fraud, and a high percentage of that fraud are seniors. And I know I have concerns about the CFPB actually closing down the Office of Financial Protection for Older Americans. And so my question to you is, will you commit to restoring that office, specifically the ensuring that the office is adequately staffed and meeting the legislative and regulatory and reporting requirements of the law so that we can protect older Americans?
Senator, you're absolutely right around the unique risk posed to elderly Americans on the consumer side. As they age, they're more likely to accumulate medical debt that can subject them to aggressive collection tactics. There are, of course, some issues around cognitive decline that can make it harder to resolve their issues. And so, it is important that the CFPB continue to monitor those issues, devote enforcement and supervision resources to those ends, and coordinate with the other agencies. And as you point out, there is also a statutory responsibility to maintain this office that is helping to do that coordination and monitoring. So yes, I think consistent with what I said in my opening statement, I'm going to follow a law that includes performing each of the statutorily assigned responsibilities, and one of those is this office.
So if the administration tells you to fire the people in that division, you're going to disagree with them, because the law says that office has to exist and it has to be staffed and there has to be resources to seniors to protect them from fraud. Is that right?
We're going to make sure we have that office perform its statutory function.
Okay. Let me ask you this. The law also requires the Consumer Bureau to maintain the confidentiality of information obtained from people and companies it supervises and supports. You know this. So what will you do to ensure that people who should not have access to private supervisory information and who have conflicts of interest, what will you do to ensure that they are prevented from accessing it?
Senator, we're going to implement our policy to protect the security of that information. I think another thing that is important on this note is I would really like to take a close look at how much information the CFPB has still on its servers and whether that's really necessary. There's been a lot of focus on this issue, and I think we need to be focused on both risks, external and internal. We also should be thinking about the risk that China or another adversary get a hold of that information.
Yeah, and making it public. Let me ask you this. Do you believe the Consumer Bureau should continue to regulate payment platforms?
Senator, we have the CFPB. If I'm confirmed, the CFPB and I will execute on its responsibility to monitor risks under all the consumer financial laws. That's both in the banking system and outside the banking
And that would include payment platforms. So do you believe that one company with a payment platform should be allowed to access confidential information from the CFPB of its competitors?
Senator, I don't know the terms of any, the nature of any such issue.
The answer should be no.
Right.
Right?
I'm not sure.
That's pretty easy to answer. So that's my concern here. You don't need to study it. I think it's pretty easy to answer that.
Yeah.
And the question will be, and this is what we talked about, and I think for all of you, what we are looking for, every single one of you have talked about following the law. And that's what I'm hoping you do. And not a rubber stamp to an administration that thinks that they have the ability to disregard the law, ignore Congress and the agencies that we have created and shut them down to the detriment of people in this country. So I am hopeful that you guys are standing guard and you're doing just that.
I'll give you a chance to respond if you would like to, or we're going to go on.
Senator, I'm fine. Thank you.
All right, Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of a fine Tennessean here today. We've got a panel of highly qualified nominees, but in particular, I'd like to recognize Jonathan McKernan, a native of the volunteer state who's dedicated much of his life to public service. And by electing President Trump, Americans have voiced their desire for national leadership that reflects the values and interests of all Americans spread across the heart of our country, not just power centers in our nation's coast. Jonathan's upbringing in East Tennessee and his remarkable resume give me confidence that the CFPB will be in the hands of a leader who will make very good on this mandate. I'll come back to you, Jonathan, but I'd like to start out with you, Mr. Pulte. The FHFA ensures that its regulated entities fulfill their mission by serving as reliable sources of liquidity and funding for housing finance and community investment. If you're confirmed, how will you carry out the mission of making housing more affordable for all Americans?
Thank you, Senator. What a great question. And very nice meeting with you and spending some time with you. I think you're exactly correct. I think first and foremost is we need to have a safe and sound market. Obviously, we saw what happened in the housing crisis, and eventually everybody wasn't even able to afford anything. So that's first and foremost is a safe and sound market. The other thing is we need to look out and figure out where we can eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. I look forward to looking at that, seeing where we can potentially identify things and what have you. The other thing is we can make sure that we are looking at different opportunities to appraise homes properly or look at manufactured homes, for example. Manufactured homes are very well-built structures. And if confirmed as FHFA director, I believe that there are really some great opportunities between my friend and colleague at HUD, Scott Turner, in terms of manufactured housing, as well as on the mortgage side at FHFA. So there's a lot of exciting things that we could do, Senator, and I look forward to working with you on some of the ideas we discussed.
And a lot of the issues, a lot of the hurdles I think that you're going to find have to do with regulations that actually get in the way and impair the function of the market and increase cost on builders and impact in a negative way the available supply. So I'll look forward with working with you on that respect as well. I really want to just emphasize that your private sector insight on these matters is rare, and it's much needed here in Washington. I understand the need for policy experts in agencies like the FHFA, but we also need leaders that have business backgrounds who deeply understand the industries that they interact with. And I think you've got a deep experience here that could really lend a lot to the agency. And I'd just like to ask you broadly, what are the most valuable leadership lessons that you've learned in your time in the housing industry, and how would you apply those as you take on this agency's challenge?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. I would say that first and foremost, I'd like to go into the agency as well as understand with Fannie and Freddie Mac exactly the talent that we have. I understand that there's quite a bit of talent in this organization. I was fortunate to be raised by my father and grandfather, both who were entrepreneurs. And I learned from my grandfather, whose company, which I eventually joined, which built over 800,000 homes across America. And so, Senator, there's a lot of lessons that I learned both in housing and in managing people, how to treat people, and how to provide for a roof over people's heads. And it's with that same spirit and dedication. Housing is in my blood. And I look forward to really bringing that into the agency if confirmed and ensuring that as many Americans as possible can have the American dream. Right now, costs are just so out of control, Senator. This needs to be fixed.
I look forward to seeing your energy. I think it's contagious, and I look forward to your inspiration in an agency that we want to see function well. Mr. McKernan, I want to come back to you now. Dodd-Frank established, in my view, an undemocratic and seriously flawed funding structure for the CFPB. And I think it's important to clarify the statutory authorities here. Acting Director Russell Vought has requested no funds from the Federal Reserve for the coming fiscal quarter, partly because the CFPB's current balance is excessive. In your view, did the Acting Director break the law?
Senator, let me say first, thank you for the very kind words. To appreciate that. We're going to have to let the courts decide that, but I don't see a legal issue there.
Nor do I. Nor do I. So to confirm, the CFPB director has sole discretion to assess the needs of the Bureau and make funding requests accordingly, so long as the request abides by statutorily prescribed funding caps. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
I thought so. So Acting Director Russell Vought isn't doing anything unlawful or unusual. In my view, he's simply exercising the authorities given to him by the Democrats who architected Dodd-Frank and the CFPB's funding structure in the first place. There's a glaring double standard here. Progressives are gleeful when a Democrat administration appoints a CFPB director who unaccountably advances their partisan agenda and spends an eye-watering amount of money. Then, when Americans entrust a Republican administration and a Republican director to lead the agency, Democrats suddenly panic and complain that the Bureau is being operated unaccountably, even though both administrations are operating under the exact same structure. For years, I've led legislative proposals to bring greater accountability to the CFPB. If they're true concerns, I urge my colleagues to work with me on real structural reforms. Otherwise, these cries of rogue leadership at the CFPB will just continue to fall on deaf ears. So I hope that we'll have an opportunity to find a way forward on a bipartisan basis to address this concern. Thank you, Mr. McKernan.
Senator Warnock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congress created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, in the wake of the financial crisis, during which Americans saw Wall Street bankers get bailed out, while millions of working folks lost their jobs, their homes, their retirements, their life savings. That's the situation out of which the CFPB emerged. Mr. McKernan, thank you. I enjoyed our meeting yesterday. Good to meet you. And I want to follow up on our discussion about the Trump administration's efforts to dismantle the CFPB, the agency you've been nominated to run. President Trump has said the CFPB is, quote, a very important thing to get rid of. Yes or no, do you agree with the president on that point?
Senator, as I've said, the CFPB is a product of statute. That is a question for our elected officials.
It's a yes or no question. Do you agree that it's a very good thing to get rid of?
Senator, I think our elected officials decide normative questions like that. I just execute on the law.
You've raised your hand to run the agency. I think you ought to know whether you think it's a good thing to get rid of.
Well, I will say this. I certainly think that consumer protection is a very good thing. It's a critical thing. A federal consumer protection role is a very important thing. That's a lesson I learned from my experience in the 2008 financial crisis. We need to have a regulatory system that works for everyday Americans, and that includes a consumer protection function.
I'll take that as that you agree with the president that we don't need the CFPB. We need consumer protection, but not the CFPB. Is that your answer?
We need to have a strong consumer protection function.
So President Trump and Elon Musk have basically gotten rid of the CFPB, which is why the question is so urgent. And the Bureau has seen dozens of key employees fired. They've been told not to engage in its core supervisory or examination duties required by the law, and has even had its physical headquarters closed and locked. I think that's a pretty clear message. If someone closes down the office that you've been nominated to run, with the CFPB effectively eliminated, how on earth do you plan to lead a shell agency that's been completely gutted?
Senator, I'm not aware of the situation about the staffing and resources at the CFPB. Well, what I will point to is just what the administration has said in its filings and some of the litigation ongoing here. And they have said that we are going to have a CFPB that is streamlined and efficient. And quoting, I think, from the brief here. It says, a predicate of that is there will be a CFPB. Again, though, this is a question for our elected officials. My job is to follow the law and execute on my mandate.
In the last 3 months alone, the CFPB has received more than 80,000 complaints from Georgians, with the Bureau currently seeking resolution to more than 40,000 of those complaints. With the CFPB shuttered by President Trump and Elon Musk, what's your plan to ensure that the Bureau resolves those 40,000 pending complaints from my constituents in Georgia?
Senator, like I said, the consumer complaint function is a statutorily required function. That's in 1021C. And so my mandate, if I'm confirmed, is to fulfill faithfully, fully that statutory mandate.
Mr. Pulte, when we met in my office, thank you very much, Mr. McKernan. When we met in my office, we discussed the issue of appraisal bias, the disturbing trend of homes with Black or Latino residents being systematically valued less than homes with white residents. This is pretty well documented. And, this is discrimination that denies these families the wealth and home equity they've worked hard to earn. As I said to you in my office, this is real money. You think about the value of the most important asset that most people have, literally to have its appraisal depend on who opens the door is unconscionable. And we agreed that data on home appraisal bias is economic data, and that you are a proponent, you said, of transparency and publicizing such data. Do you still believe that?
Thank you, Senator. My recollection of the meeting is that I would like to get inside of the agency and understand exactly what specific data you're looking at. But generally speaking, I'm in favor of all economic data being looked at before saying whether or not something should be released. Having said that, transparency is a hallmark of what I've done. And as it pertains to appraisals, especially with the populations that you're talking about, my experience in Detroit is very relevant. And I very much understand the issue, and I would look forward to working with you if confirmed.
So under the Biden administration, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which you've been tapped to lead, helped lead an interagency working group to address appraisal bias and provide more public data on the issue to shine a light on this problem. Should FA continue to play a role in addressing appraisal bias? I think that's a yes or a no answer.
Thank you, Senator. Appraisals are absolutely critical, and if confirmed, I look forward to working with you on that issue and understanding.
It's good to hear your answer. I just want to make sure that I respect the time. When HUD Secretary Turner sat in my office, he said that he expressed genuine interest in learning more about appraisal bias, but on his first day as secretary, he deleted all public-facing information about HUD's previous work to tackle appraisal bias. Mr. Pulte, if confirmed to lead FHFA, will you commit to maintaining all data, publications, and other materials concerning appraisal bias on the agency's public-facing website?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Again, I'd like the benefit of getting inside of the agency. I'd like to work with you on this. I'd like to work with your staff on this. I know this is something that you're very passionate about. You know, my family's legacy company is based in Georgia. Atlanta's been very good to our family. I'd love to come and take you up on your offer to visit your church. I'd very much like to work with you on this, but I'd love the benefit of being inside of the organization before giving you definitive answers one way or the other.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator, who's next? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pulte, I'll start with you since you wore such a great tie this morning. I couldn't be more proud of President Trump to nominate you. Your background, your experiences are perfect for this job, the insights that you bring to it. You might know that under the Biden administration, they enacted some policies that I think were really bad, sent a really bad signal to working class families. Let me talk about one of them. Under the Biden administration, they changed the formula for the loan level price adjustment fee that screwed families with good credit scores to subsidize more families with bad credit scores. I wonder what message does that send to people who work hard, who pay their bills on time, who are doing all the right things? What message would that policy have sent to them?
Thank you, Senator. It's a great question. Loan level price adjustments. pricing is essentially what I view it to be, I believe generally should be priced on risk. Now, having said that, I think that it's something that I'd like the benefit of, if confirmed, going into the agency, understanding it, understanding specifically with the data inside of the agency before I give you a definitive answer on what, if anything, should be done. But generally, I believe that pricing should be done on risk. That's how we avoid another 2008 or housing crisis, is we got to ensure the safety and soundness of the housing market.
Yeah, fortunately, the Biden administration, on the way out the door, they ended the policy in December. But I hope that we never allow something like that to happen again. I mean, it's a bad signal to send to hardworking families who do the right thing, and that they would be punished for it. So I appreciate your commitment to look at that and make sure that we don't bring back bad policies like that. Dr. Miran, enjoyed our visit in my office a few weeks ago. As you know, this week Apple announced its plans to invest $500 billion in the United States, creating over 20,000 jobs, especially in advanced manufacturing. I wonder, what role do you think that the president's tariff policies played in that announcement?
Thank you, Senator. And yes, I very much agreed the opportunity to discuss these issues with you in your office. I think the president's policies played a very large role in such an announcement. The president has been very clear that he's not going to stand for asymmetric trade relationships in which we give unfettered market access to our consumers to other countries and they don't reciprocate. And he's made clear that he's going to stand up for American workers and American firms. And I think that his very clear willingness to do so is incentivizing not only investment in the United States from companies like Apple, but also other countries, sort of beginning to make concessions on national security and on trade as well, even preemptively before any threats have been made.
Why do you think so many economists tell us the opposite, that tariffs are going to cost us jobs in the U.S., and yet this announcement sort of proves the opposite?
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. I think the reason why most economists view tariffs as being unhelpful is because of a quirk of the modeling methodology, where they basically assume that trade deficits, balance out to zero over the long term. But that really hasn't happened in recent decades. So clearly something is wrong with the assumptions underpinning these models. Indeed, if we review the history of tariffs, we see that in the 19th century, the average tariff rate on dutiable imports was in excess of 40% for most of the latter half of the 19th century, and the average tariff rate on all imports was in excess of 30%. Nevertheless, this was a period of extraordinary economic transformation in the Industrial Revolution. Even after World War II, the tariff rate on dutiable imports was in excess of 30%, again, a period of very strong economic growth. It wasn't until the 1970s until we really get to the period of very low tariffs beginning. And coincidentally, that coincided with the reduction in growth rates. Now, I don't want to claim that correlation is causation, but nevertheless, the historical record is very clear that the American economic story has seen periods of high tariff rates coincide with extraordinary economic success. So there's nothing in the historical record that would say that it's impossible to have a fabulous economy with high tariffs.
Those jobs were either going to go to China or the United States, because President Trump and these policies, they're coming to the United States. So it speaks for itself, and I'm very proud of that. Really quickly, Mr. Kessler, Communist China has built too many weapons using stolen American technology, and BIS oversees export controls, which are supposed to stop the PLA from getting its hands on sensitive technologies like bioweapons, ingredients, or cutting-edge chips. But career bureaucrats over the years at BIS have rubber-stamped deals for decades to send some of our most important technology to China. What can you do to stop that?
Well, thank you, Senator. I will not rubber stamp deals like that, and I will make sure that we scrutinize any request along those lines very carefully and make sure that every action that we take is consistent with our national security priorities.
Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you on that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair Scott and Ranking Member Warren, and thanks to all of our panelists for being here today. I appreciate that, and your families also. Welcome. I'm going to start with Mr. McKernan and then get to Mr. Pulte if I have time. The Trump administration, Mr. McKernan, the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress have repeatedly attacked the CFPB and challenged, even undermined, its legitimacy, branding it as this rogue partisan agency that is out of control. President Trump and Republican colleagues, and I think even you, have said that the CFPB faces a crisis of legitimacy. And yet it seems to me that this crisis is caused by people all the way up to the president undermining legitimacy of the CFPB and then declaring that it's not legitimate. This is a bit, to me, like an arsonist starting a fire and then yelling fire. So, Mr. McKernan, you are in an unenviable position. You have been nominated to lead an agency that your bosses have said should be killed off. Elon Musk has been said that the CFPB should rest in peace. And I have to say, I listened to your responses to Senator Warner, and it also bothers me that you couldn't say straight up that returning $21 billion in money stolen from American consumers, you couldn't just say that that was a good thing. So I want to dive in on this a little bit. Do you think that requiring $80 million in illegal overdraft fees to be refunded to service members and veterans was a rogue action or a partisan action? That was something the CFPB accomplished.
Senator, I'm not sure which action you're pointing to there.
Well, the CFPB required $80 million in illegal overdraft fees to be refunded to service members and veterans.
If they were illegal overdraft fees, then certainly they needed to be refunded.
Yesterday, you and I spoke about Wells Fargo, one of the largest banks in the world. The CFPB required them to compensate consumers for the harm they incurred when their houses had been foreclosed on and vehicles repossessed through no fault of their own. Is that a rogue action or a partisan action, do you think?
If there was illegal conduct there, then certainly the enforcement action is supported. I just don't know the facts of that case.
So you can't say that you trust that the CFPB had the correct finding there?
On that particular case, I've not looked at both sides of it.
Okay. When we spoke yesterday, you told me, I asked about the many lawsuits that are pending before the CFPB and what you thought would happen to them, and you assured me that you would review these lawsuits. We are just learning during this hearing that the CFPB just dropped a bunch of lawsuits, including the one against Capital One, which was for ripping off consumers to the tune of $2 billion by steering consumers, their customers, to lower interest-bearing accounts. So during this hearing, I guess Elon Musk or Russell Vought or whoever is in charge is saying that they're going to drop these lawsuits. And I mean, how do you respond to this? I mean, this makes me question, like, who's really going to be in charge of the CFPB if this is what's happening while your nomination is being considered?
Sir, Senator, I'm not sure I understood the question.
My question is, who's going to be in charge here?
Senator, if I'm confirmed, I'm the director.
Well, it's not clear to me because at the moment that we're sitting here talking about you taking on this responsibility, Russell Vought or others are dismissing lawsuits that you just told me you were going to have the opportunity to review before they were dismissed. Mr. Pulte, I want to follow up on a conversation that you and I had about the rising cost of housing, something that I appreciated our conversation. A big driver of this rising cost is the cost of insurance caused by extreme weather events, all these terrible storms. In Minnesota, working families are struggling to manage almost a 40% increase in home insurance rates. And Minnesota is pretty lucky compared to other states like California and Florida, where hundreds of thousands of homeowners have been dropped from their insurance. So I want to ask you, I think this is putting a huge financial risk on families. Could you talk to me a bit about how you think the rising cost of home insurance and the lack of insurance availability, what impact that has on affordability?
Thank you very much, Senator. It's a great question. In the state of Minnesota, we have mutual friends, and our family's legacy business has done a lot of work in Minnesota over the years, and you guys have really done a lot of good things in Minnesota as it relates to affordable housing. With regard to your question on insurance, the FHFA is somewhat limited in terms of its jurisdiction. I will just make a general comment, however, that the cost of insurance is insane in this country. And to the extent that FHFA can play any part in thoughtfully reducing insurance costs, which I'm not so sure it's totally within our jurisdiction,